welcome to the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. It's Tuesday, May 28th at 5:15. To my right is John Schweizer. To my left, Tom Kendall. Myself as chair. We are here today to provide a recommendation to council on ordinance O-12-2019, rezoning of in-lot 10858, approximately 10.284 acres on Peters Road, from county zoning R-1 AAA and A-1 to city zoning of R-4 single-family residential district as recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. So I appreciate everybody's patience to finally get to this meeting. And I know we have a lot of data in front of us that was given ahead of time, which I greatly appreciate to Bart for giving us that ahead of time so we could look that over. Patrick, would you like to add any additional comments before we get into?
Sure, just to put on the record that Planning Commission unanimously approved recommending this to the council. They did so on March 13th. There was an official public hearing required by the zoning code that was held at the council meeting on May 6th. And then because there was some confusion and some inconsistency on which zoning district was being requested, there was some further public input scheduled on the agenda for May 20th, and that public input item was held that evening at the council meeting. I would note that while I was not able to attend that meeting, I did watch meeting. I have had conversations with staff. It is worth noting that some of the questions, some of the concerns that were brought up about the proposed rezoning in review and in discussing with the applicant, they are items that will be addressed as more detailed design work is done on an actual subdivision. And so since this is simply the rezoning, it's early on in the process, but those concerns would be addressed at the time of detailed submittals to staff and up the chain.
Okay. Tom, do you have any questions, clarifications?
Not at this point, no.
No, I don't either.
Okay.
I think we've heard everything and seen everything at this point.
Okay. Any other council members have questions? Yes.
Patrick, when you go up that process, this is the only decision council will have, correct? Any changes to design issues or any of those concerns will all be handled internally?
The reviews are from the administration and the Planning Commission when it comes to preliminary plat reviews, and that's approved by the Planning Commission. Final plat approval comes to the council. So that final design, if you will, that does get approved by council.
Okay, so all today is the changing of the rezoning.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Do I need to put on there? Does anyone not know who I am? That's Todd Sievert on 148 Mary Robin Road, for the record.
Thank you. The only thing that I would request, I know Choice One Engineering's here, maybe just to explain I know a flood was a concern and there were some questions at the last meeting just on some of that being taken care of with the retention pond. So I don't know if you could come up and just explain briefly.
Sure.
That way we just, I know it was a couple concerns mainly on the flooding.
Andy Schumann, Choice One Engineering. We are working with Mr. Denlinger on the development of this property. What he's handed out to you tonight is a little more detailed drainage map showing what I call the pre and post conditions of the site. I think the second page probably be on the top, but it is, shows the existing condition as it is, the blue lines. So it shows the drainage area, direction of flows, the arrows there. The long blue line is where the water concentrates and flows down through the property to the east toward the creek. And then the dark squiggly lines, for lack of better terms, are the contour lines. So that kind of shows you the topography of the area. They're kind of sitting on a hill where the lines are closer together. That just means it's a steeper grade. Where the lines are farther apart, it's flatter. The second page is the beginning of the design. It shows the same drainage areas, the dashed purple line, and the solid purple line is the direction of flow of the water into the subdivision. Everything within the drainage area is drained toward the streets, is collected in the sewer system, storm sewer system, and to the detention area per city standard, and retained and discharged to the north in the creek, the same creek.
And how large is the retention pond? I know a question was asked, if we had a major rain, would it fill the retention pond and overflow the retention pond?
Major rain. What is a major rain?
Yeah,
It's city standards, 100-year storm. So that's what the pond is designed to, 100-year storm.
okay. And the other question was on releasing to the river, is that controlled? It's not all done at one time, basically the
Correct.
retention pond gets filled and then it will?
Yep.
And how's that? Is
That-
it just a mechanism that,
It is a smaller hole in the pipe
Okay.
that detains the water from releasing at a faster rate than what it is allowed to.
and as Choice in Engineering, you have done retention ponds before to other developments within the city of Troy that have worked to
Yes,
take the water, put it in a pond, and then release that later.
yes,
at another
yes, we have.
And there's been success there. There hasn't been flooding.
No,
Later
no,
on.
they've worked to what they're designed to.
Specifications.
Yeah.
Question, Tom?
Yeah, Andy, one question that came up too was, how do you get the water to flow uphill to the detention pond?
How do we
Are you
get the
changing
water?
the elevation?
Yeah, because if you're coming from the south, maybe I'm wrong in looking at this, but it looks like the detention pond would set above the southern point to get the water up into there.
No, the lots will be graded. I mean, we're gonna move, what we're cutting the road in, that will be used to build up the lots, to make the houses higher, to get them to drain toward the streets. The street conveys it into the storm system into the detention pond at the north end.
Okay, so it's going to be level with the streets then, or a little bit below?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit below in the back, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But the whole property, you're going to change the elevation so that it's more plain-like or flat?
Yeah,
Or so
we'll have
it
to.
drains towards the center and then towards the,
Right, we'll make the high
retention ponds.
spots, the high spots will be the building pads, and it drains away from those and, into the collection system, either on the street or behind the houses.
Okay.
If I may.
Bob?
So just to put a number on it, and we talked at last committee meeting that you were not here, to the east, with the dotted line around the rear of the backyards of the house on the eastern side, on your page 1.
Yes.
So with everything flowing to the left or westerly, you're roughly, I'm just picking a number, you're roughly taking 90% of the water and shoving it to the west. And approximately, just my number, is only, 10% is only going to drain back to the east after the grades. I mean, just to use a number system.
Yeah, I would say, looking at these drainage areas, the drainage areas on both these maps are the same. So that drainage area is representative of what we're changing, okay, and what we need to detain. So the areas around the outsides are gonna do what they do now. I mean, we're not touching those, so there's no point, there's no reason to, we're not making anything any more impervious there. So those are not included in the drainage area.
Yeah.
But it's about rough, yeah, I would say you're probably 90-10, just guessing that, with the math.
Okay. That's all I had.
No other questions at this
Okay,
point.
thank you. Any other councilmen have questions? Anybody in the audience have questions or need further clarification?
JJ Friggy, 1635 Peters Road, Troy. Just a couple of outstanding questions from the last couple of hearings. First, I think I heard Andy say that the 100-year precipitation and rainfall events are what is used in the preliminary calculation. There's been quite an increase in rainfall over the past 15 years in numbers of inches and events and total precipitation. And so I would ask, is there any consideration to overdevelop the retention pond with that data in mind?
You weren't saying, were you saying data was used the last 100 years or just the retention ponds based on a 100-year storm?
100-year storm.
But the water flowage, what are those, I think he's asking what are those calculations based on?
Statistical averages over the past 50 years.
So it would include those last 15 years in that statistical average?
Well, it's not updated every year, okay?
Okay.
So the last revision may not have included the last 10 years. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But it's not something that's updated every year. But it's a standard that every community.
That we have to use because that's the data that is present.
Data that's available, that's correct.
Okay. And then that's used to calculate, here's how much water is going to be displaced. This is how big the retention pond should be. Here's how much is moving. Because right now, 100% of the water is just flowing downhill.
Correct.
There's no drainage on that land. So as we build, like you said, Bobby said approximately 90% will be captured.
Right, we need to slow that down.
Slow it down. Okay. Does that answer your question on the data being used?
Yeah, I think it just goes to the point. I would just ask, to share the data around that 50-year average that's being used. How does it compare to the latest 15 years? And when does the data point stop? And is the pond appropriately sized or not? So I understand that math hasn't happened yet, but I would ask that.
But you're saying that pond, the retention pond, is able to hold, if a once in a 100-year storm came, it would hold that water.
If a 100-year storm is designed for a 100-year storm, correct.
So what I'm saying is that it's big enough to handle the last averages of the 15 years of rain. Does that make sense?
I'm not
Like if
sure.
we're-
I'd really ask to sit down with Andy and walk me through it. To be honest, I don't know that it makes sense without seeing the numbers.
Okay.
How many retention ponds have you done in the city of Troy? Do you know? Do you remember?
Did you do Stonebridge or Stonebridge Meadows?
We did those subdivisions, we've done, what else have we done? Nottingham, all of Nottingham. Kensington, some of that, in years past.
But in spite of doing all those different retention ponds, have they all contained the water that they were designed to hold in spite of the rain for the last 15 years?
They have performed as they have been designed. Now, we've gotten rains that have exceeded those amounts, or circumstances of, I would prefer to, when Stonebridge Pond overflowed, I think there was an outlet issue there, so there's some maintenance things as well, but, you know, the ones that we have designed have all have actually performed like we designed them, at 400-year storm. Now, we've had storms that have been bigger than that in recent years, JJ's point, and I agree completely. But that's a legislation change, and it may be beyond what you guys want to tackle, but that's where it needs to come from. And there's actually talks, I'm getting further down the road, but there's actually some talks out there about changing that in the future.
But my understanding of a developed property is it can only shed, you have to maintain the amount of water that is shed after it's developed. There's only a certain amount that can go out the outflow pipe. Is that correct? And is that equal to or less than what the property was like before it was developed?
It has to be less than or equal to what it was before it was developed.
Okay.
Yes.
So even if there were a large rain event, still the amount that is going to flow out that pipe is only going to be the same amount is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I at the risk of putting words into Mr. Friggy's mouth, I think the whole question revolves around the initial size of the retention area. And so, yes, it'll hold as much as the diameter and the depth and the volume allows it to hold. And so when talking about designing for a 100-year event, the question I believe that you asked was, what is the 50 years that you're using to come up with that average so that then you can design an adequately sized pond?
Correct.
Or detention area. Is it 15 years old and then 50 years older than that?
Right.
Or is it 2018 as the right-hand date and then 50 years before that? So, you know, how current is that data set that's used to create the average? We will double check that. Everybody uses the same standard. It's a standard that's used in the engineering world. I think they all share the same data sets. It's relatively current, but I think what Andy's saying is that it may not be through 2018, but we'll verify that when we go through and see exactly when those dates are when we review the actual storm drainage.
I think he said it might be up to 10 years old, and then the add-on question would be, is there a percentage of overdevelopment of the retention area to account for, you know, something greater than that 50-year average that you're designing to?
Yeah, and I can say that when the staff reviews these plans, typically there is a little bit of oversizing just to be conservative. What percentage of oversizing that is, you know, sometimes we design them so that, because we know we have to take into account other areas of the city, and so we will deliberately oversize them a significant amount. I don't think that this one qualifies for that because there's not a general benefit to doing that. But again, when we get into the detailed review of designs that come through, the storm drainage is a pretty key area that we spend a lot of time looking at.
Right, and there is a sensitivity of the floodplain proximity. So understand there's not many other homeowners, but there is, you know, the federal floodplain. Okay, so more data.
Patrick will double check those standards that are used.
The next, I guess my next question would be around the potential for groundwater contamination, and that's been an open question for 2 hearings now, and I didn't know if the council or Andy or Mr. Denlinger had a comment on that or not.
Again, I apologize, I wasn't here at the last meeting. Can you kind of summarize
Sure.
what the concern is and where it's coming from?
Yeah, so according to the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission findings published on their website and through their maps, the natural environment factors of that area would indicate a low development potential for that property. And one of the main reasons was the natural environment factor of potential for groundwater contamination in the surrounding areas, in short, where the water is draining to. So
And what are the potential sources of the groundwater contamination? I guess that's where I was not clear.
so today we have basically a 10 acres undisturbed property. And we're going to be putting in 22 houses with treated lawns, pesticides, fertilizers, chemicals that would run off through the retention pond into the creek onto my property and the surrounding properties.
I guess we can review that with MVRPC, but I'm not familiar with that language that they included. Christie, have you reviewed that language at all?
I'm not familiar with the language that you're referring to, but I would say that there is a component to stormwater design where there's a water quality component.
Christie?
That choice.
Can you come to the microphone just for, if anybody's watching?
Really need that.
So Christy Butera, Assistant City
Yes.
Engineer. So there is, when they design a basin, EPA, Choice 1 will submit, there's a component that takes into a water quality component, which honestly, normally it relates more to detention time in the pond, and that it's going to, I mean, there are other means that you can do, but that's the most common route, that it just kind of settles out to the bottom, for lack of a better word.
Is that standard language that MVRPC includes on their comprehensive plans?
I'm not familiar with that language, I'd have to look it up. But a water quality component is a standard review comment in every detention pond that is reviewed.
And that was why I asked my question, JJ, because we're not aware, we have 2 Superfund sites in other areas of town. This is not part of that plume area or part of that area of influence, and not thinking of any upstream potential contaminant sites that would feed over there, other than what you're talking about with fertilization and just general residential maintenance activities.
Right.
That's why I asked for your clarification.
Yeah, so we're on a well, obviously, and we have a pond, and that will drain to the entire floodplain to the east of us and beyond. So, and then just the same Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, recommends for future land use that area of undeveloped agricultural area south of Troy corporate limits, bounded by Peters Road, 25A, and Swales Road, was recommended to remain in this pattern or in recreational use due to proximity of residential uses. So I don't exactly know what that language means, but that is in the latest MVRPC comprehensive plan. I think next would be, and maybe my last question, based on the map and the engineering drawing provided, the outflow of the detention pond is on the far western side, correct?
Yeah.
Northwest corner? Right, which would happen to put that outflow upstream of my bridge, which is my primary and only access to my house. And so, as the map shows, none of that water on page 2 is currently draining to the northwest, and taking 90% of that water, to your point, to the northwest corner and outflowing it upstream of my bridge would seriously jeopardize the bridge and the ability for me to get to my house. Just this morning, after the rainfall last night, we had water flowing over the bridge, and I've supplied pictures already of those events. I've still got all kinds of debris on my bridge right now from this morning, and adding 90% of that water to upstream is going to cause significant problems.
Probably something Andy can answer. But I think, again, it goes back to, if I'm reading this correctly, you've got the retention area, it's on the north side, and that outflow is actually controlled by the diameter of the outflow pipe.
Correct.
Meaning that it's all channeled in a very narrow, controlled way, rather than running free like it is now, and creating the issue with your bridge.
None of that water is running free north upstream of my creek. So any water, whether it's a 4-inch pipe or a 6-inch pipe, any water added upstream would be additional water.
But we're taking away 90% of the flow you have now.
No, you're not. All of that water, all 90% is still going to drain through my property at some point. You're taking 90% of it, which drains downstream of my creek, and putting it upstream. I mean, Andy, that's the fact.
We'd have to look at the size of the bridge. I mean, this development is
Andy?
10 acres. Development area is
10.7 acres of the entire watershed that comes down through the creek. So we could look at this hydraulics of the bridge and come up with what effect 10 acres has on this 600 or so that comes through there. I'm guessing it's a very large drainage area. It's a fairly large drainage area that comes through the creek through
I
the,
would imagine.
so.
I mean, yeah, sure.
If I may interject, these are preliminary drawings, these are concepts, not the final.
Correct.
They haven't done the calculations
Correct.
to do this, so it's just, something to go into the punch list of items to consider.
Can we take a look at that bridge and pass that along to the city?
Sure. As part of the development review,
Development review, when it gets to that review.
we can note that for administrative.
For, yeah.
Well, I think the point is it's either going to improve my water condition or it's not, from a drainage and flooding potential. And I'm not at all convinced that it's going to improve it based on capturing the water in a different way that's flowing through my property now and discharging it in a different way that certainly has negative impacts to the bridge. And then it's, the same amount of water, agreed, at a more controlled rate, which could help.
Could help.
I'd like to be convinced based on the math. But this looks like it's not making it better. It's actually making it worse from a bridge and accessibility standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to see what that data says. Understand. Anything else?
No?
Okay. Anybody else with comment?
John Friggy, 1208 Ridgewood Drive. Andy, Bart, Todd, I have the utmost respect for all three of you. I'm talking as a grandparent. I've got access to JJ and Lisa and the two girls' property one way, and that's over the bridge. If we could, I'm selfish, I know I am. But if that bridge gets knocked out, they have no other access, I have no other access to my grandkids. I don't want that. If we can work something out, if we can get a meeting together, talk about this, I would love that. And talk about water pressure upstream from the bridge. The bridge isn't the greatest bridge in the world, but it's functional at this point. And I just think that extra pressure is going to wipe that bridge out at some point. That's my main concern. Just wanted to let you know.
I just would like to also note, it's not my bridge. I access it through an easement. And it actually, I believe it belongs to Mr. Buchan, who lives in Michigan. And I'm not sure about that, but for the record, I believe that he may have concerns about that as well. So that's speculation. I would like that to be clarified, but I maintain it and I use it as the primary use. And I think it should be noted that it's not just me that is impacted by this, it's the property owner to the north as well as the discharge going further upstream would impact his property, for sure.
Can we find out who owns the bridge?
I don't know if we got access to those records. If Mr.
It-
Denlinger does.
Mark Denlinger, 1291 Orchard Drive. Yeah, it is an easement that JJ has through the Buckham property. So that whole driveway is like a shared easement through there. But I guess I'd like to start by saying that when I first met Mr. Frigge at his property, he showed me pictures and videos of water just streaming over the bank and everything else. I think you've all seen them as well. So we've got a plan that's going to control that water. And granted, we're going to do a point discharge, but it's taking away his original concern with all the raging water coming over the hill. Now he's concerned about it coming out at a different spot. I understand that. If there's something we can do with the bridge, I'm sure we can work with everybody involved to take care of that. And I guess I would hope that he was as thorough when he purchased his property, knowing it was on the floodplain and everything else, and water it would come to him, as he was as thorough as the research he did for my property that I'm looking to buy. So he lives on a floodplain, he's going to get the water, we're trying to help him out the best we can, and I think Choice One solution is going to be the best thing for all involved. Thank you.
Any other? Sure.
Again, for the record, I don't need to make this a big public ordeal. I would be happy to talk with Mr. Denlinger. I don't want to rely on thinking and hoping. I'd like to be convinced with data as we go through this process. That's really all I'm asking for, is a sensible plan that is data-based and does, because I am in the floodplain, as he pointed out, it cannot make anything worse for my property. And
Correct.
yes, I have researched this quite extensively. Yes, I have researched my own property quite extensively before we bought it. I knew what we were buying. And that is what led to my initial concerns, and I just want to make sure that we're data-based and not relying on thinking and assurances. I think, again, let the plans speak for themselves, and let's agree on what that plan looks like before we make decisions and agree to things that set balls in motion. And I'd be happy to do that out of the public forum, for the record. We didn't have any communication for quite some time. That's why I felt like I had to come to the council.
Just one question, Patrick. As far as all the warrants and everything, everything is met for the rezoning and all that Mr. Denlinger's doing, well, the requirements of the rezoning
Sure. Yes.
is all met. I
That's
mean,
all been
yes.
met, right. And again, that's why I said in the beginning, there are some questions that we will answer during the design review, should this be rezoned and the detailed drawings be submitted, that, it's just too early yet to really dive into that, because that work has not been done.
correct.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
All right, how would you like to move forward?
Moved on to council.
Move it on to council.
Moving on to council.
Okay. Based on the fact that we are, I agree, we'd like to move this to council based on it being a zoning-only issue, and if it meets all of those requirements. I do ask that the city, during the plan development, as those numbers and data becomes official, that we share that with Mr. Frigge as they go through that planned
Okay, you said planned development,
Or
it's a development.
through the development, yes.
Through
Yeah.
through the rest of that process.
Through the rest of the development process. Because we can only vote as this committee on the rezoning, and does it meet those requirements of the rezoning? And I appreciate that data, some data and analysis was done ahead of time, but I think there's a few more details that Mr. Frege would like. I would like to provide that to him as the development goes. So at this time, we'd like to move forward to council with the rezoning. All right. Anything else come before the Community and Economic Development Committee? All right. Meeting adjourned.